Have you been enjoying today's conversations? Well, we have another great one for you coming up. One of the things that I'm doing to support the campaign is to help organize some of the different For Harris groups that are popping up. And one of my favorite calls that has popped up is White Dudes for Harris. That has been organized by my good friend, Ross. He is one of the lead organizers for White Dudes for Harris, and he's also the co-founder of Run for Something, which is an organization that trains young progressives to run for office. They are a great partner of Emerge, and he's just my buddy, and I love him to death. We're also going to be joined by another individual who is involved with White Dudes for Harris, actor, father, husband, Sean Astin. Cheers for him. Because I all know you know Rudy, the movie, but for me, it really wasn't a sleepover unless you were watching The Goonies to make it really happen. And it's going to be moderated by a truly fabulous woman, Liz Plank, who is a social media activist, and she has a great book called For the Love of Men, which encourages men to ditch the toxic masculinity, and that is something that we definitely saw on the White Dudes for Harris call. So I'm going to bring up Liz, Ross, and Sean for this great conversation.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Howdy.
We're so excited we got all the seating wrong. We wanted to come out doing the Macarena, but we didn't know if everyone was going to get it, that it's a callback to the DNC images that we've been seeing from the Bill Clinton years where people were so excited doing the Macarena. And people were like, this is what the DNC is going to be this year. Do you feel like it's on par with the DNC Macarena memes that we've been seeing?
You had Little John yesterday representing
Yes,
Georgia.
there we go.
So that's the 2024 upgrade.
That's the version, the upgrade from the Macarena. I love it. I love it. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Are we speaking loudly enough over the rock? Okay, love it. So I'm so excited to be here today. I don't think I could have foreseen. I mean, I could not have foreseen this a month ago. But even thinking about the potential of a first woman president, having a panel about white dudes wouldn't have been the thing that I would have naturally thought would occur. But I am excited that this is happening, and I think that this is one of the many sort of symbols and signposts that tell us that something is happening that's really different this year. We are in a very important moment, and it just feels different from 2016. Do you feel that difference? Is it something that you can put into words? Is it palpable for you?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I can compare this to that I've ever seen is 2008. But in 2008, there was a naive exuberance to everything that we were feeling. This year, there's a battle-hardened excitement that only comes from knowing what you can lose.
Wow, that's powerful. And what about you? Do you feel?
Well, I mean, I feel no, it's impossible to have imagined a white dudes for a candidate thing being in any way an acceptable expression of, but the white dudes took the cue from the black women and then the white women.
That's right.
So the leadership architecture seems
correct,
intact and appropriate, and So, but I was saying to Ross a little bit ago that when I was going to tweet out, I mean, I only found out I was going to do it, minutes before it happened, or 2 hours, something like that, some short period of time.
Wow.
I was going to tweet the link to it, and as I was composing it, I was uncomfortable.
Oh, really?
I was uncomfortable. Yeah, I wasn't sure how to, because, the patriarchy, needs a little bit of an upgrade, you know what I mean, or a downgrade, I don't know. And my daughter, my 22-year-old daughter, I read it to her, and she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, it's ironic, right? It's like there's a little bit of whimsy. To call it dudes is to take the sting out of something. I don't know." And she goes, "Don't do that. You're a white man. Just be who you are." And I was like, please come to the White Dudes Fair. Like, I just did what my daughter told me, and it became something where so many people have fed back to me, I'm sure, and obviously to you creating it, that finally, people are able to express themselves. And I love that, like, you know, before it's over, it's a tapestry. Black women and white men and Asian men and Latino men and Latinos and Asians and comics and hotties and from that thing last night. And, you know, like, it actually is a way to celebrate individuality, but also to make the blend so powerful.
Yeah.
So that it feels like speaking into the moment in a way that has strength and humility.
Yeah, that was so good. I plus one everything you say, and we're used to seeing white men. When there's the term white men in a headline, it's usually not a good thing, right? Like something good doesn't tend to have happened, right? Like, and I think that when I saw the headline and same as you, where I was like, oh, white, I was also going to share it not as a white man, but I was like, oh, am I going to get backlash for this, or is this going to be interpreted? But I felt emotional sharing it because I was like, oh my God, I have something. Look, we have something positive to assemble around. And Ross, you nailed it on the call for the White Dudes for Harris. You said throughout American history, when white men organized, it was often with pointy hats on. This was an example of men gathering in a positive way. What was it like to be on that Zoom and to see that? Was that sort of the first time you had seen that happen?
To be honest, when we first organized it, I wasn't totally sure how it was going to go.
Yeah.
And there was definitely risk, and I had a lot of conversations with folks to ask, should we do this? And every single person replied basically with the same thing, which is, it's on you to organize your people. Like, we cannot organize them for you.
Right.
And, when we got on the call, Sean can, I'm sure, attest to this, we didn't give people talking points. We said, we want you to talk about two things. One, why is it important to vote for Vice President Harris? And two, why is it important for white men to organize other white men for Vice President Harris? And I think the things that we got back from people represented, I guess, in the words of Bradley Whitford, a beige rainbow, or rainbow of beige. But the call weirdly represented the diversity of life experiences that a lot of white men have. And I think it was really beautiful to see. I didn't expect, when Sean was talking, I was telling him earlier, like, I started to tear up a little bit. I didn't expect to have the reaction that we did, and I also didn't expect for us to get outside the bubble the way that we did. When we went back and looked at the data, over 50% of the people who attended the call were from either a red state or a purple state.
Wow.
And we heard stories. One story I heard was from an organizer friend in Wisconsin. He was at a diner in a town of 12,000 people. There was a table full of a bunch of people talking about the White Dudes for Harris call on the night of the call. And so I think breaking outside the bubble was actually not something that we expected. We just thought we were going to raise money and be really helpful. Yeah. But then it became something more than I think we even expected.
You can't understand the White Dudes for Harris outside of the context of the MAGA movement.
Yeah.
So pointy hats is a really important, touchstone when you're talking about, the second out of 47 presidents is going to be a person of color, first woman. That dark and awful history of America is important to always note. But we're living in a moment right now where not just the punditry, not just the normal kind of news coverage, but culture has basically ceded the ground of white America, if there is such a thing. It's awful to even think of it like that, to a certain worldview. And there is a thirst, a hunger, a desire for people who haven't had agency in that conversation. There's no purchase. What's your launching point? Because if you launching point, you're in a weird. It's like, listen, the patriarchy is real. White men have had a pretty good run for the last, couple thousand years. So you can't sort of be like, well, when we did that, the next night I looked at Fox News to see how Fox, not just the news, but the punditry shows, and Jesse Waters and the folks on his show tried to belittle it, and they looked stupid. They looked like they were so out of touch, particularly the one guy who I love on that show was searching for a way to mock these guys, talking about why they were expressing themselves, and they're better than that. They're better than that. I expect them to behave better than that. There you go.
Wow. How did they get mocked? Because I think this is actually, what you're talking about is
really their
important.
Feelings.
Right.
Oh, the white guys are going to talk about their feelings now. That's what.
So again,
Jesse Waters' riff was incoherent.
Right.
Actually.
And
I think he's a smart guy, and and I watch that show.
Right.
But I'm trying to pick this little conversation with him right now because I would love nothing more than for Fox News to try and argue against the idea that white men have a place in this conversation that isn't just with that red hat on.
Right.
I think Jesse Waters said something to the effect of, science demonstrates that if a man votes for a woman, they transition into being a woman.
Yeah.
I think that is the quote that he said.
Yeah.
Well, he was kidding. He was kidding. They were. It's a fun show. We shouldn't spend too much time on it probably, but too late now. But it's a fun show. They are clever. They are witty. But that particular joke just wasn't funny. It just didn't land because it was, chauvinistic.
Well, because it's still patriarchal, right? It's using the system that oppresses women to oppress men, or to hurt, or to degrade men, right? It's saying, it's using that same hierarchy that's used against women against men who are trying to dismantle that hierarchy, right? And that's a threat to people like Jesse Waters. That's a threat to people like Donald Trump, certainly, and to the entire movement. And I think because we haven't really given permission for men to really organize or identify, right, with their gender in the way that I think women are encouraged, and that there's a lot of tools for a disposal, a lot of community, and a lot of that has been built by women, built by black women who have been doing all of that community service for years. So men have to be doing that kind of work too. But I think because there's not that foundation, men can fall into these, or again, you can be attacked or mocked.
We're in a new moment, right?
Right.
It's a new moment where women, this organization of Emerge, which has helped to train and prepare women to run for elective office, the vibe is changing.
Yeah.
So now white men have to figure out, don't feel too sorry for us, we're doing fine, but we have to, if we really want to honor my mother and my wife and our daughters and, my daughters, if we really want to honor them, we have to listen to them, and we have to, I try and own my own space in my house where there's 4 women and 1 guy, but it's so empowering. It's so empowering when you can stand in support of a strong woman.
And that if you're listening to a woman's problems, her problems are connected to yours, right? So I think, again, a lot of what I find so exciting with this conversation, with what you're building, with I think the moment that we're in, is that we are connecting those conversations. We're no longer sort of letting the right and letting a certain section of society sort of dictate what manhood is and how you are, supposed to be a man. And I think you're saying, no, that's actually not masculinity. Like, even if we were to go to the RNC, right, which is a stark contrast to the DNC so far. At the RNC, we had so many abusers on stage. We had Hulk Hogan rip his shirt open, and we had WWE, what's his name? Dana White? Dana White, who's also been accused of several bad things done to women. So, and Trump coming off to "It's a Man's World." Like we just have. Is that, how do you message to men that that's actually not masculinity? That's patriarchy, and that's a prison for you.
I think the thing that we need to be building towards, because so much of traditional masculinity is essentially rooted in far-right ideology if you actually trace it back, and we need to be building the world where men feel like they can be who they are on the inside and live that in their daily life without fear or shame. That ultimately, I think, is what masculinity becomes at the end of the day. And I think that's where the loneliness epidemic comes from. Yeah. That's where radicalization comes from. That's where people feeling like they don't have a sense of community comes from. That's where people feeling like that they're not an obligation to anything bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
And I think the right is giving them spaces to feel those things, because at our core, human beings all want the same things. And it's on us, white dudes, to start to create some of those spaces for people, because we've just been letting the sort of like far right, and it's not even, I say far right, but I don't even mean it always in a political sense. Even like the manosphere, like we've been letting those folks go after men for so long uncontested. I think this was a moment where we started to push back, and I think the genie's out of the bottle now, and I think we just keep moving forward.
Yeah.
The problem with toxic masculinity is the toxic.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with masculinity. Yeah. I don't know how to. The Me Too movement was mission critical on planet Earth. The Me Too movement, I was so, supportive of, not just supportive of, but felt the need to try and find ways to support it or acknowledge it. I think in the period of time after the most visible moments of the Me Too movement, there's been a series of missed opportunities. And I think that men feel threatened, and sometimes for good reason. So jokes, mob mentality, it's a kind of mob mentality. If you're standing around with a bunch of men and people are joking and whatever, it's a little bit hard to punch into that moment and be like, hey, actually, guys, can we stop making this joke? It makes me a little uncomfortable. I'm a little uncomfortable with the direction of these jokes. Like, that's not going to happen. So I think that it's incumbent upon women to help make men who are doing the right thing feel safe.
I would add to that too, that I think like for the men, I think for those of us who think differently, it's also on us to find each other, even if in some of those moments we don't do the things that we wish we had done, to like make sure that we're finding each other and having those conversations with each other, because I think ultimately this work is hearts and minds work. And you're not going to get to people by telling them that they suck and that they need to be better.
Yeah.
You're going to get to people by, it's the same work that we do in any kind of organizing. It's one-on-one conversations with people, and in often quiet moments where, you're saying things to folks in ways that like you may not say publicly, but you're like, hey, like that thing, like I would prefer you not say that, and here's why. And like there's a lot of organizations that are out there doing really incredible work like that. Phil Agnew at Black Men Build does like really, really amazing work around that. And so I think like it's going to be like a yes and situation.
Well, it's that I think, and again, when I think about 2016 and some of the things, that have changed or lessons to learn, I think that we let Donald Trump own a message about men because he was the only one really, speaking to men directly, but saying, and he was saying, oh, it's harder for men now than it is for women. And even though we disagree with that message, he was the one who was speaking to them. And so they were like, okay, well, at least this guy is acknowledging that I exist, And I think that this is where it's, especially in these conversations, I've had conversations with men where I've approached them and been like, this, I think that you're better than this, right? Instead of coming and saying, you're an idiot, I'm not gonna be friends with you anymore, it's saying like, I see your potential as a man, I see your potential as a human, and I wanna help you reach it. I think that's a really different conversation, but I don't know, like, are white men, you are the white men whisperers, like, are men having these conversations with each other? Because is this sort of, which again I think comes from patriarchy, that you don't have as many close ties as women, you're not taught the same kind of skills and community building. Is that part of the issue, that you're not necessarily able to organize in a positive way because you don't have those structures in place that perhaps women sort of naturally have?
We have the Fortune 500, and we have, there's a lot of structures. Here's the little secret. When people feel threatened, they attack. To look at woke culture, which isn't always the most evolved, it doesn't always get it right, but for people to want to have these sort of conversations about sensitivity or being in support or having a secondary role in a company, a family, being in support. I play Samwise Gamgee. Being in a supportive role, I've had people tell me for 25 years, like, we love that character. We love him because of how well he supported someone else. So I feel like the mocking, the denigrating, the insulting, the demeaning, the dehumanizing that is done in a political context and in a media context is actually a tell. It's a tell for their own fears. And so I don't want to be the kind of person to exploit those fears. I want to be a person who can help build away from those fears, which is, I think, my way of saying exactly what you were saying.
I love it. Do you have any thoughts about that, or not really? Yeah, I mean, so where do we sort of go from here as we're wrapping up the conversation? Can I ask you I have a question. It's not tea, but is there a group chat that's ongoing? Is there what's the apparatus currently that is propelling the White Dudes for Harris movement?
There is a group chat.
And what's the name of it?
There's a couple of group chats. We do have plans to do more work this election cycle. We'll be partnering with some other groups on a couple more calls. We're hoping to do some stuff at the state level. We're also hoping to do more to create some visible signs in communities so white dudes can see that there are other white men in their communities that support the vice president. And we'll continue. We're going to continue working. We're going to continue working through the rest of this cycle, and then what comes after, we'll see. But I think this opened up a conversation. I feel very committed to making sure that conversation continues in whatever capacity that means, not just for this election cycle, but beyond it, because I think if we don't, two things happen. One, we just keep going off the cliff that we're already on the direction of. But two, I think really for a lot of people, this is a matter of life and death. Sean told a really beautiful story on the White Dudes for Harris call. I have a friend who ended up taking his own life largely because he couldn't come to grips with the fact that he was gay and didn't feel like he had anyone that he could talk to about it. And so we need to do it for the sake of doing it, and we also need to do it for the sake of all of the people who get hurt when sort of patriarchy gets acted upon, in violent external ways.
Yeah.
So community building happens all the time, whether you want to or not. Conscious community building like this, on such a epic scale is almost creates its own level of new responsibility, new obligation, new opportunity. But we're at the Democratic National Convention. In the history of our country, these conventions mean something. They're historic. They're not faux historic. They're actual historic. You can look back along and trace the policies of this country to the personalities of the people and the way the rules played out, and you know, democracy is a sloppy, you know, uncomfortable thing. But to me, now that I had a great moment. I got to do a roll call for my wife's state of Indiana.
Amazing.
And now everywhere I go around this convention, I'm hugging everybody.
Yeah.
I'm hugging white people and black people and Asian people and Hispanic people and Native American people. I'm hugging everybody. And our hearts are seeing each other.
Yeah.
Our hearts are seeing, our eyes are seeing each other. We can appreciate each other for who we are, and like, it doesn't matter. What really matters is, like, do people have enough food to eat? Do they have a roof over their head? Do they have an education? Can they get a job? Can they be protected when they're in that job? These are the things that ultimately are meant to be at stake in this space.
Yeah.
So it's awesome that black women for Kamala stepped up, and it's awesome that Ross and his team stepped up.
Yeah.
And now, you know, the idea that it's not going to be a 48-state blowout, given everything that we know and understand, is, to me, like, you know, a bit of a disappointment. But you can never take anything for granted. You can never take someone who voted for Donald Trump for granted. They have their own ideas, they have their own reasons, they have their own passions and philosophies and ideas, and all you can do is live by example.
Yeah.
And if we do that, then white men will assume our fair and rightful place in the constellation,
Yeah.
not above.
Yeah. I mean, that's great. Yes. And it would be an interesting challenge for the Democratic Party to respect Trump voters more than Trump respects them, right? So we know that there was a former assistant who spoke, or I don't know what her job was, but she worked with the Trump administration. And
She was a special aid.
Special aid. And she spoke last night and, you know, revealed that he just, like, you know, thinks very low of them. And so if we can actually treat them with more decency and respect, you know, that's a more interesting way to bring people in. And I love the part about hugging. I feel like this is like, has like an Eras Tour vibe, or like a Beyonce concert. Like, everyone's just, right? Everyone's just like having a good time, and there's just like everyone's smiling at each other.
Coach Tim, you know, he said our neighbors. We
Yes.
are each other's neighbors.
Yeah.
So all of us have family members who are on. It shouldn't be polar. It shouldn't be binary. We
Yeah.
should be able to have more thought. I'm graduating this week with my degree in master's in public administration and public policy.
Oh my God! Wow.
Thank you
A lot
very much.
going on.
I got through a whole conversation without saying it. It's usually the first thing out of my mouth. But I've studied now for a couple years what mid-level administrators are doing, the people who are actually making government work and trying to understand systems and trying to understand constituencies and needs and stuff like that. And I feel like there's a moment where we can actually, like, is it molting? We can, like, shed the skin, the detritus of some of that old way of thinking and being, and just start actually doing the work. Like Michelle Obama said, like, do something.
Yeah,
you know?
Totally. And so before we wrap, the black men who organized on Zoom was a deeply important, you know, part of this whole apparatus as well. And one of the things that Van Jones was on there and you know, said the amount of black men who said we need to protect her. We need to protect her. What I thought was so fascinating about that is, like, here's a positive role for men to be taking, right? And again, for some people it might seem, oh, well, that's patronizing. A woman doesn't need to be protected by a man. Unfortunately, because we live in a patriarchy, women do need to be protected. But to me, there was something about there's a positive masculine virtue, right, of protecting and providing that men like to fulfill in our society. So before we, you know, head off to our next events and go hug and trade bracelets at the DNC Eras Tour, what is your vision for a positive masculinity this role that men could be stepping into for this election?
I think it's a lot of what I talked about a little bit earlier. People need to be able to live their lives authentically. And they need to be able to do that without feeling fear or feeling shame about it. And I think it's not my job to judge how somebody's masculinity manifests unless it's harmful or coercive. And I think there's a million ways that could actually look for each individual person. And I think I sort of operate under the idea often that like you can't be what you can't see. And I think part of what we're trying to do, part of what the call was trying to do, honestly, part of what your book and your podcast does is show people that there are different ways for masculinity to manifest. And one way is not better than the other. We don't need one way to do it. And actually having one way to do it only hurts the people who are representing it that way, because ultimately what that type of masculinity does is it destroys the individual, and then once it destroys the individual, it starts to bleed out, and that's when you start to see destructive behavior externally. And so honestly, my vision for the world is one where people can just be who they want to be on a daily basis, regardless of how that manifests.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Yeah. Sean?
You remember your prompt, too. You remember my prompt?
You didn't tell me what my prompt was.
Okay. My riff.
Your riff.
My
Okay,
riff.
this
But
is the
first,
riff.
Well, no, first, I just want to say, yes, and. So I've been married for 32 years, and I have 3 daughters. So I feel like that's a PhD. I never understood the physical threat that women had in society, because my mother, who is 4'11", Patty Duke, president of our union, men were terrified of her. She would own every room she was in. She could walk down any street. She was like, she might as well have been 50 feet tall and weighed 10,000 pounds. She's just a fearsome individual. So it took until my daughters got into college, and I started seeing what they had to navigate. And I thought my job as a father was to, provide and to help them prepare for love relationships. And I didn't realize, like, a woman getting into an elevator with a man who they don't know can be, like, dangerous.
Yeah.
So I think men have an actual protective role to play in being gentlemen and being thoughtful and considerate and looking out for each other just the way you would for anyone that needs it. I know that my wife and family and mother and all the women I know, they look after me. I'd be, God knows where I would be if I didn't have their support. I'd probably be, no joke, I'd probably be dead. Mm-hmm. And my wife would be like, well, you don't have to say it out loud, but it's true. Listening is important. Men who listen.
Mm-hmm. Listen to everybody, not just to women. Like, listen to other men. Like, just listen.
Listening is powerful. So
it's a good skill.
Yeah. Not trying to fix everything. That's a hard-earned lesson. Here's my riff, and unfortunately, I'll only be able to do this riff for another 77 days. It was true when I campaigned for Hillary I campaigned for her first in 92, but every time she ran, I would use this riff. I was raised by a strong and powerful woman. I have been married for 32 years to a strong and powerful woman. We are raising 3 strong and powerful women, and it is way, way, way beyond time that we elect a strong and powerful woman president of the United States of America.
That's a riff. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much. That was amazing to the both of you. Thank you to this amazing audience. And let's thank you. This was so much.
Can we thank Liz for her leadership?
Thank you, Liz.
Should we do the Macarena on our way out? Okay, great.